welcome to Off Watch. The Ocean Race has evolved a lot since it started in 1973 as the Whitbread Round the World race. And one thing that's changed is a healthy regard for what it would mean to ask the sailors to sail into the ice floes. Since the 2005-06 edition, we saw the introduction of an ice gate, something to limit the sailors' exposure to the icebergs. But one of the sailors certainly had already caught the bug. Skip Novak, who's my guest this week, has been a four-time competitor in the race and is now someone who spends as much time as the season will allow exploring at those extreme latitudes. He's got some incredible stories to tell, and we hope you enjoy it. Skip Novak is one of the Ocean Race's legends, not just because he's done the race 4 times, but also who those campaigns has been with. At the tender age of 25, he navigated King's Legend to second place in the 77-78 edition after having beers with the right person at the right time in a cow's bar. He's also sailed with world-famous pop stars as part of Drum and Fazizi, a boat that started the 89-90 edition representing the Soviet Union, but at the finish line was very much an international affair after witnessing the collapse of the Berlin Wall. But racing is only one side of Skip's persona. He spent the last 30 years of his life exploring the Southern Ocean, a part of the world that most round-the-world yacht sailors can't wait to leave. With 2 specialist, ice-hardened, storm-proof specialist yachts, he's been able to explore at a pace that most racing teams simply don't allow. So, Skip, thank you very much for joining me today for this interview.
Thanks very much, Neil. Good to be here.
So let me start off with that, because this is one of the big conundrums for me. Most of the people that I've spoken to with these interviews talk about the Southern Ocean with a respect, but like I say, they want to get out of there. And those ones that do come back try and minimize the amount of time that they spend down there as possible. What is it that they are missing? What is it that has taken someone like you and it's got a hold on you? Why do you enjoy being down there so often?
Well, I mean, the maritime part of the Southern Ocean is one thing. And surely on the round the world races, by the time you get to Cape Horn, you've had a gutful of the cold, iceberg risk, all sorts of dramas going on. And you can't wait to turn the corner and get up into the Atlantic. It's like being in a mill pond, a very psychological mill pond. And but for me, the attraction really was to, after my racing career, was to go down south to access all these subantarctic islands and Tierra del Fuego behind Cape Horn and Antarctic Peninsula and South Georgia, all these sort of places that I often sailed by and wondered about. And then this is all pre-internet, so it was very hard to get any information on these places, what it was like and what was there and what you could do there. And so I wanted to find out for myself. And that's, one thing led to the other. And I wound up going down in the late 80s, and I'm still going down, still super enthusiastic, still plenty of things to do, plenty of places to go I haven't been.
And we should probably point out that, you are right now preparing to go out there again.
Yeah, I'm actually, it's not a very photogenic background. That's a ceiling of a hotel room in Cape Town you're looking at there. And I'm 4 days away from finishing a 2-week quarantine in a hotel in Cape Town with 11 other people with the Royal Society for Protection of Birds, RSPB. We're going down to Gough Island on my big boat, Pelagic Australis, to do a vanguard team to start a mice eradication project on the island. Gough Island's a little outlier southeast of Tristan da Cunha. A lot of the boats sail very close by to it on the way to Cape Town on various around the world races. And I've never been to Gough, and another golden opportunity to go to some place I haven't been.
So let's just have a look at that, because you said you sort of retired your racing career, but you obviously didn't retire from a life at sea. So is it the adventure is obviously still something that gets you up in the morning and still drives you. What was it about the racing side of it that you'd gone, I've got my fill? That aspect of it I can leave behind.
Well, I think, it was a combination of a crossover, because after the drum race with Duran and Simen and all that, we built my first boat, Pelagic, the 54-footer in Southampton. That was sort of a came out of the drum crew. Patrick Banfield designed the boat, Phil Wade and I, and Chuck, my old friend from Chicago, put money into that, and I built the boat in Ocean Village at the time. And so I was already headed in that direction. But of course, the racing career didn't end because I wound up on Fazisi in 89, 90. And then, of course, sailing the Maxi Cats with Bruno Perone in the late 90s. So I sort of flipped from one to the other, and they sort of coincided because I was doing my Southern Ocean expedition career on the southern summers, and then on the southern or the northern summers, I was sailing the Maxi Cats in the late 90s up until the race in 2001. So it was great. But to answer your question about the end of the racing career, I'd done 4 Whitbread races, and at the end of the day, I was from one generation, and I knew that it was obvious what was happening in the Whitbread. It was being, basically, rightly so, taken over by very good dinghy sailers, Olympians, America's Cup caliber sailors, and sort of the era of the deep watermen, even though there was a crossover, was sort of at an end. And I was, I wasn't a spring chicken either back then either. I did the race in 2001. I was 50. And so I thought, this is a good time to hang up my hat. And plus, trying to raise the money for all these campaigns. And I've never been really that well funded besides the drum campaign. And so it was a struggle. And you have this sort of uncertainty going from one project to the next. And in the mix was a family beginning, and I thought I'd better have some sort of continuity, even though Southern Ocean sailing and expedition sailing, what I do is most people wouldn't look at it as anything continuous. It's pretty crazy, but it was a steady trade, and I built up a business on the back of those first expedition trips, and now we have the 2 boats, and we're building another one in Holland, and we found a niche, which is still I'm absolutely passionate about.
With what you do now, you give people access to this incredible part of the planet, which is so important for so many reasons and so awe-inspiring. But in a lot of your campaigns that you've done for the Ocean Race, there was also some teams that you thought, well, that's not a typical team. I mean, I mentioned the Soviet Union before, but also drum, Simen Le Bon, Duran Duran. This is a world-famous pop star, not somebody that you would have thought would be making an easy transition into a round-the-world yacht sailor. Can you just sort of silence any critics? Or indeed, can you sort of confirm the rumors? Was Simen there as someone to say, look, I want to do this, it'd be really cool, I'd like to wear the badge? Or when you were putting that team together, was the fact that this person was also an international rock star, was that just something else?
Well, he was the facilitator of that project, so like I am facilitating all these other projects. So you start off like this, and of course, this was another, oddball campaign, so to speak. And I think I'm pretty famous for that, doing these weird and wonderful projects. But, when we started the whole thing, it was one of those things you couldn't ignore. You didn't know how it was going to end up. It could have been a total fiasco, even without the Fastnet capsize.
But now, hang on. I've got to pause you there. Because for anybody that's memory is a little bit hazy here, I mean, this was it was like less than 2 months, I think, before the start. You say, it was a Fastnet capsize, but that doesn't really do it justice. I mean, this could have been pretty tragic. Just for anybody that's missing this little bit of their history books here, what are we talking about?
Okay. To go a bit back further, we bought a used Maxi. Well, it wasn't used. It was an unfinished hull, because this all started in January of the year before the '85 Whitbread race. And Simen and his partners, Mike and Paul Barrow, came along and said, we want to do the Whitbread race. And it was decided pretty early on it had to be in a Maxi for Simen's profile and not in something else. And there were no Maxis. You couldn't build one in the time. So we looked at used Maxis. And we did find an unfinished hull in the West Country that was built for Rob James, a famous sailor who tragically died in a trimaran accident the summer before. And we inherited that boat. We wound up with a boat launching, I think, in June, and with a couple of months ahead of us to do the Whitbread race. And so we started sea trialing the boat and racing in the Solent and all that. And of course, the big tune-up event was the Fastnet race in '85. And off we went sailing down the coast of Cornwall, and make a long story short, the keel snapped off in 25 knots of breeze with number 2 and a couple of reefs, and the boat went upside down in 20 seconds. It was a catastrophic mechanical failure of an aluminium structure part of the keel. It was bolted onto the composite structure. And the boat went upside down with 24 people on board, and luckily nobody lost their lives. We were all rescued within about 40 minutes to an hour by helicopter, and RNLI boat came out. And Simen was trapped down below. He was sort of stuck in the boat with 5 other guys. When the boat went upside down, I managed to get out. It was basically every man for himself when we heard this big bang and the boat just kept heeling over. We thought
Did you instantly know what the problem was? Did you think this is it?
No,
It's keel?
instantly you think it's the mast has gone when you hear something like that, but then the boat just kept going. It was already heeled 15 degrees, and it wouldn't, if it mast went, it'd pop straight up. So, Phil Wade, he was near the midship section, and he just shouted to everybody down below, just get out, everybody out, get out. And it was every man for himself. And by the time I got to the companionway hatch from back in the nav shack in the back end, water was pouring through the companionway, and I was fighting upstream like a salmon trying to get out of there, and just managed to get out as the whole thing went upside down, and I was sort of just outside the rail of the boat as it came down. So it was a very dramatic incident, very short-lived, and luckily everybody was accounted for with a few hiccups. We were trying to yell to the guys down below not to go out. And I remember Neil Cheston was counting the heads down below, because we had 18 up on the upturned hull after everybody hoisted themselves out, and he counted 5, but he forgot to count himself. And so we had 23, so we sort of assumed, we've got one guy missing, and everybody was sort of panicking, and then they did a recount, and all 24 were accounted for, yeah. So, yeah, and, have a thought, too. If this would have happened 6 hours later, after we passed Land's End, it would have been night in the middle of the RSC, and, it would have been a totally different outcome. Yeah, no doubt.
You say that campaign was a little bit late, or at least you got the boat a little bit
Very
later
late.
than you would have
Extremely
liked.
late, yeah.
Yeah. I'm wondering, experiencing something like that and going through something like that, obviously it's not the way that you would like it to happen, but I imagine that after that, you're pretty gelled to go through an experience like that as a team. You've sort of, it pulls you together.
Yeah, it did. I mean, the Fascinate crew was not going to be the Whitbread crew, because that was a less number of people on board. So we sort of consolidated into the Whitbread crew, and everybody hung together. And we had 6 weeks to go from the capsize to the start of the race, and we had to rebuild the boat. New keel, new rig broke on the tow-in, new electronics, new sails. Everything was trashed.
Did you have to rebuild your confidence as well?
Yeah, well, we almost didn't have time to even think about those things. We were just headlong into getting to the start, and luckily Simen and Mike and Paul did back that campaign with a lot of extra money, because we had Simen's reputation riding on the line, and not least of all our own as well. And luckily everybody stuck together. We got to the start and took off. Then we had some dramas on leg one, as did the other, 5 other maxis had structural problems getting into Cape Town. There's another story. But we did, sort that out eventually, and went around the world and got 3rd. We came very close to beating Peter Blake. He came 2nd, Pierre Fellman 1st, Peter 2nd, and we were, I don't know how many, 12 hours out of 2nd all the way around the world after a few tricky moments. So we were pretty happy with the result, and it was a great team, and we just we one of those things, you stick together after all these years. We've had our last reunion in 2015 in Monaco, and we're still all in touch with each other, and it's one of those things that sticks with you forever, camaraderie.
Oh, I've been going down the rabbit hole of the videos on your website.
Yeah, you could spend a lot of time in quarantine doing that type of thing.
Yeah, they're incredible. And you think when someone says, "Oh, we sail in ice," I think, okay, there's an iceberg and you can kind of see it. But there's images of you guys having to get out hammers and chisels and breaking ice that's kind of got frozen furling gear and drums and windlasses and all the rest of it. Absolutely incredible stuff. Have you ever had a point where you might be thinking, I might be pushing this boat a little bit too far?
Well, the big boat is, I would say the big boat, we've always been in control, so many lessons learned from 10 years with a little boat. But, probably the dodgiest time I ever had was with the little boat on the first year we went down there in 87, 88. I'll never forget it. We wound up in Maxwell Bay in South Shetlands, up on the north part of the peninsula, and we had to drop somebody off at the airbase there, and a huge gale came in. Two guys were ashore, they couldn't get back to the boat, and we had to pull off the anchorage, and it was an easterly, big snowstorm, minus temperatures, and we spent the night motoring up and down an iceberg that was about half a kilometer long, that was grounded inside the bay. And, if the engine quit, we would have lost the boat. We would have washed up on the rocks somewhere. And we just motored up and down in survival suits from one end of the iceberg to the other, turned the boat around. And, that was all night. Luckily, it was a short-lived, sharp storm. But by the morning, when it calmed down, the boat was covered in 4 inches of ice. I mean, the whole thing was completely iced up. And, you couldn't make sail. You couldn't do anything. And it was obviously getting top-heavy. And we luckily motored back and spent the whole day chipping out. And, that was probably the, one of those lessons learned early on in the game that stuck with me. And yeah, but in those days it was the same story. Weather reporting was very dodgy. Today we'd see something like that coming. Back then, we had a weather fax machine, but that's sort of an artist's impression of what may or may not happen at the time. And we got caught out badly.
Yeah. Interesting you sort of talk about you're one of those wonderful people that are still out there doing it and out there in the elements at the moment. But of course, you started at a young age, like I say, 25 when you did the Whitbread, but you had plenty of sailing before then. You've seen an awful lot of changes. One of the things that I wanted to ask you about, and I mentioned Rick Tomlinson before, who's a photographer of world note now. We see so much stuff coming from the ocean race as the boats sail in these amazing places. Certainly with the high latitudes, where you are there all this time, what can a photograph or an amazing drone shot, what can it just never convey? What are we still missing, those of us that only watch this from our armchairs?
Well, I think nowadays the difference is, when we went down there in the early days, and still very true in my boat when I go down south, is that, we are sort of in our little boat, in our cell alone, and we're not sending up media reports every 5 minutes, and we're not hooked up to, the web and all the rest of it. So I think what they're missing today is a bit of a solitude, which I think we enjoyed back when we did it, and we were really out there, and we had a lot of time, even though it was pretty, balls out sailing and rugged, and, you still had time to think about things, and conversations were not muted. They were not censored. Nowadays you have to be slightly careful of what you say and beam up Scotty up to the satellite. Whereas back then, we had a lot, probably more hijinks and probably a lot more off-color conversations than you would now. And so it was more of a personal experience. Now everybody's pretty much stripped bare. If it's not live, it'll be in the recording. And, that's not my cup of tea. Let's put it that way. That's not why I go down there. Not why I went down there in the first place. But, I knew the value of getting things up to the media. I think I was one of the early guys in the Whitbreads that, wrote a lot of articles. I knew how to talk to journalists, knew how to press the right buttons and that type of thing. And so I saw the value in all that, and I saw how it had to go in order to raise money and commercialize the event. I mean, that was obviously the evolution that had to come. But sort of when it hit full force, as it is now, I took a step back and said, get on with it, guys. Go for your lives. I was quite happy to,
Because, you did mention another time something about sending those articles from the boats back at the time was not like now where you hit send and the satellite dish just does it. This was a laborious process.
Oh yeah, I mean the great story was I did a deal with the Daily Telegraph and became a columnist during the whole Fazisi campaign, had to file 800 words to the newspaper every week, either on shore or on board. And of course, on shore is easy, but on board, that was a whole nother thing. And this was now, at the time when Murdoch was trying to bust the print unions in London. And even though we had a Inmarsat C, and I could have sent that, I typed in that story on the Telex Inmarsat C system and sent it. I wasn't allowed to do that by the newspaper because it still had to be taken by a copy taker. Something like sort of antediluvian system where I had to call up on the HF radio, call up Portishead, and of course it was great, Portishead radio, because he sort of recognized the guy's voice and he recognized you got to know this guy at Portishead radio. It's fantastic. And you'd tune it in on 25 megahertz and you'd start, call the newspaper on the phone line and then you get a copy taker. And this could be any time of the day or night. They got one there. So you'd start telling the story, the 800 words, and you're trying to, spelling things out. And of course, he knows nothing about sailing. So you're trying to describe how you just did a Chinese jibe and everything went to hell, make it interesting. And he's saying, can you repeat that? Can you repeat that? And in the middle of the article, the frequency goes down because time has changed. And you got to recall up on a different frequency, try to get the copy taker. And of course, that guy went home, started again with the other guy. So sometimes this took hours of work to get that story out, and all the time you're bombing along in the Southern Ocean in the nav shack, up and down. It was a hell of a game. Yeah.
And those boats that you were on, it does sort of feel like when I look back at the history books that they were the sort of turning point in that game. You had Drum, where people that had nothing to do with sailing were really interested in the exploits of this pop star at the height of his fame, and so that they were drawn to the race, so that there needed to be articles, there needed to be photographs, and I guess Fazizi as well. It was an unusual team representing a corner of the globe that had been, shall we say, unrepresented. So it felt like those two teams were the sort of the catalyst for people realizing.
Yeah, and you have to add Tracy Edwards into that with Maiden of Great Britain. Absolutely, that was another thing. I think those three boats transcended the yachting genre to a great extent and put it in the mainstream media. Certainly with Drum, with the capsize, and we had tabloids all over us. In the hotel in Falmouth after we were rescued. I remember Simen had to jump out of a first floor window to get out of there, because he was being sort of, assaulted by the tabloid hacks. And so all these vignettes were fantastic. But yeah, that really did lift the game for yachting a bit into general public, which I think everybody's benefited today to some extent,
Definitely. I mean, and it's pulled in so many more fans of the race. And I think one of the other things as well that one of those campaigns certainly did for Zizi is one of the things that I think that sport does in general, but certainly this campaign did, which was bring the race to some people that otherwise wouldn't be involved with it, wouldn't be touched by it, and vice versa. I mean, having the Soviet Union involved at that time must have been, there's a political heat that comes with that. Was that in any way factored into you getting involved with the team or indeed how it would function?
That was another one of those things that when I got invited to go over to Moscow, I was, contacted out of the blue again. I think it was January or something, and Vladislav Murnikov, the designer, said, we know all about you from the Whitbreads, and we're building a boat for the Whitbread, and we'd like you to come over and get involved and help train the crew. So it's one of those things you couldn't say no to. And I said, yeah, that's a great idea. Send me an air ticket, And they said, we got a bit of problem with currency. Can you fly yourself over and we'll reimburse you eventually? And of course I said, yeah, sure. Okay. So I bought my air ticket. If that was thrown away, so what? And I went over there of course, when I went over there and met the people and they were all great, you get deeper and deeper into the project, several visits to Moscow, all pre-Glasnost, pre-Perestroika. So I was very privileged to see Moscow in that old state, of the real Soviet Union. My God, it was something. And then, of course, you wind up, skipping the boat in the end. But the whole progression was incredible, where I went over there, eventually saw the boat after, I think, the second or third trip, and And I said, the boat was an aluminium hull sitting in Poti in the Black Sea port there, and there was a Russian engine in there and nothing else, bare aluminium. They hadn't done anything else. And I said, well, what about everything else? And they said, oh, well, we definitely have to get the rig and the sails from the west and everything else, the deck gear. And I said, well, how are you going to do that? They said, well, they were hemming and hawing. And I said, look, you're never going to make the start like this, trying to get all that stuff imported into Russia, if you can afford it, if you can get hard currency, which they didn't have. And I said, my only solution is put this thing on a Russian ship ASAP, get it over to the UK, and somehow we'll finish it or raise the money. At least you got a chance because people can see this thing. So they went back and thought about that evening, and came back the next morning. They says, well, I think you're right. That's what we're going to do, but we're going to fly the boat over,
Oh, yes.
Decision made within 24 hours. They got Antonov 124, and within a week or two, the boat was put on a barge down to Sukhumi, trucked to the airport, and put it in a Antonov 124 with a sea freight container and 18 crew, including me, and we all flew to Kiev, Moscow, and eventually, after some very tricky moments in Moscow, the guys got their passports at the last minute, and off we went to Heathrow overnight. So this is incredible, and I was actually, involved in all that story of, on tender hooks with these 18 crew, and my God, yeah, that was amazing human story.
Yeah, I mean, it really feels like it feels like the power of sport. I mean, what was it like being in the UK with the Soviet Union, representing the Soviet Union, being from there, which would be about as foreign a land as someone can be from? Was it a team that was welcomed with just, hey, you're a competitor, we're a competitor, we're both people of the sea, we're going to sail together? Or was there hostility?
Oh no, God no. Oh no. I mean, the people in the South Coast, they just were totally enamored with the Soviets, and these guys were all, good-looking guys, intelligent and fun-loving, and everybody took to them, and they couldn't do enough to help the project, and so we got, a lot of help gratis. A lot of people start helping fit the boat out on spec without getting paid, hoping to be paid. So yeah, that's how it all began. Totally goodwill. And the funny thing was, we tried to get money from, we got a little bit of money from Pepsi in the UK to get us through the summer. And I went over to New York with Vladislav to try to meet Pepsi headquarters, to try to get the Americans involved and get our $1.8 million to do the whole campaign at the time. And the Americans were interested, but then we got the word when we got back, no good, because we surveyed our distributors, and Soviet Union is just too sensitive, being America. This is still Cold War stuff. And they put the thumbs down. And I think that was one of the biggest mistakes they made, because the whole Soviet Union collapsed while we were on the race. You imagine if they would have backed that thing, it would have been a huge winner for them. But so what the result was, we went from hand to mouth around the world. We never really had a budget.
But just really interesting bringing together. I know it's not all completely all on your shoulders, but bringing together those two different worlds and things like that. And I understand that it's something that you're not, you're not shy in doing now. I mean, you've been out doing expeditions down on Antarctica with bringing people together that would be political enemies, in one sort of sense. You're still sort of involved with those kind of projects.
Yeah, you're probably referring to the one we did, which is another one of these amazing stories of Palestinian-Israeli peace expedition we did in 2004 on my big boat, not far after we launched it. I think it was it was the first big Antarctic trip we did in January 2004. And that was a culmination of a collaboration I had with an Israeli who'd been on Pelagic for 2 expeditions. He was a mountaineer, sort of like a Chris Bonington, Knox Johnson, all rolled into one, total adventure guy. And he and a German friend put together a project where the idea was to get a peace mission where you get 4 Palestinians, 4 Israelis to sail across the Drake, go down to Antarctica and try to climb an unclimbed mountain. That was the whole theme of the thing. And so, we worked on that for about 6 months before. And they got it all together, and they got the funding from some part from the German government, and some sponsors. And we had, a lot of high-profile people backing this thing. And we went down there with these 4 Palestinians. And the Palestinians, of course, had no experience of expedition sailing or expedition anything. The Israelis obviously did. And they got along great all the way down and in the Antarctic. And they talked about politics across the table. And these weren't kids. These were not teenagers. These were middle-aged people. And one guy, he was in his 60s. He was Yasser Arafat's fixer for many years. So these people all had histories. One Palestinian was 10 years in jail for blowing something up, and another guy spent 2 years in jail for knifing somebody in the street. And then we had an Israeli lawyer who was the guy who was putting those type of guys in jail, So the conversations were incredible. We were sort of witnessing all this as they were discussing politics in the zone. But they all got along,
There's nowhere to go on a boat like that, is there?
Nowhere to go. That was the concept, you're stuck there. And anyway, what happened in the end, we did go ashore. We did a 3-day camping trip, pulling sleds and skis up a mountain to climb a little minor peak on a ridge. And we got up to the peak and climbed the peak, and it was fantastic, and everybody was happy. And then the story ends by, the good part of it was, they rolled out this huge peace flag that had been done by a very famous Israeli artist with doves on it and flowers and stuff like that. And then the Israelis rolled out the Israeli flag, and then the Palestinians rolled out the Palestinian flag, and then they invited me to sit for the summit photo as well as the leader. And we were all there together. And then all of a sudden, the Israeli lawyer, he sort of looks at the whole thing, because the flag was signed by, Gorbachev, Dalai Lama, some German minister, Sharon, and Yasser Arafat. And he says, well, guys, I'm sorry, but I can't be in the photograph because Yasser Arafat signed the flag. Imagine this is on top of a mountain in Antarctica when the whole thing collapsed into a complete depression. And, and it was sort of like it was an example of, every peace mission ends like this, it seems. You work towards it, and then in the end, everybody walks away, or somebody walks away. So on the way back, everybody, was fairly down and out about it. And then they got along in the end. It was fine, but, it was like a big downer.
Yeah.
Having done this whole thing. Yeah.
But
extraordinary. We had a media team, we had journalists with us. We had a satellite technician, because we were sending stories to CNN about this project. It was a big, high-profile project. And we had mountain guides, and
But I think the interesting thing there, and politics is an awfully long way from what I'm qualified to talk about on the Off-Watch series. But what's interesting there is they still sailed that distance as a team. I'm guessing that on a boat like that, in conditions like that, there aren't any passengers. When you do your tours down there, people, no matter what happens, people need to get involved because you need the crew.
Yeah, no, they all had to stand a watch, and they all pitched in and helped cook and run the boat and all that sort of thing. That was the concept. And also, the idea was going to Antarctica, because every time you do one of these peace missions in any other country, there's always a political, twist to it, depending on the country you're in. Whereas Antarctica was perfect because it's non-sovereign territory. And that was one of the things that's totally neutral ground. That was the ultimate neutral ground, going to Antarctica.
How has it changed in the 30 years that you've been living down there?
Well, you got two aspects to it. One is the climate change, which is change of features. I camped on a glacier in 2002 on a mountaineering expedition, and now that glacier, now it's ocean, and that thing has receded by something like about 6-7 kilometers when I first came down to where it is now. There's nothing left of it, and you see that a lot of that, especially on South Georgia. Antarctic Peninsula, the same. Changes of features are dramatic. Where once it was an ice cliff, now it's a laid-back sort of snow slope, a lot more shorelines showing, and consequently some wildlife does better, some does worse because of these changes. So that's very evident, and that's well known. The other big change, which is, which was not inevitable, but force of marketing, was the tourism side, which is dramatic explosion in the 30 years I've been there. I think in the first year I went there, the tourism goes back to the 70s, even the 60s with Lindblad Explorer, handful of people on a special ship going down in the Antarctic, Lars Lindblad. And slowly that sort of creeped up, and the early 90s was still 1,000 people on cruise ships in the Antarctic, maybe 1,500. And then why that exploded was another consequence of perestroika, because you wound up with a whole fleet of ex-Russian Academy of Science vessels being seconded by clever entrepreneurs from the States, Europe, and Australia, and they made lease agreements for these ships for peanuts, plus including the deck crew and the staff, and they started Antarctic tourism in a big way on these with ships which are ice strengthened, fit for purpose, small expedition ships, anywhere from 50 passengers up to 100, and that's how it all began. So the numbers we're seeing now, I think last year we had, before the COVID, I think 75, almost 80,000 tourists going down to Antarctica, and 98% of those were shipborne on ships. And you have a small contingent of yacht-borne and a small contingent of air ops, deep field stuff. So yeah, and that has put pressure on the Antarctic environment, and it's the biggest single topic in the Antarctic Treaty Forum, no doubt, how to manage tourism growth, and certainly the single biggest topic in the Antarctic Tour Operators Association, which I'm a member of and spent 5 years on the executive committee of that thing recently. And, self-regulatory body about how to make rules for ourselves that will be accepted by the Antarctic Treaty, which are still manageable to conduct tourism. And that's getting harder and harder to achieve, purely by the strength of numbers coming down. Of course, the COVID now wiped the whole thing out this year. Nobody's gone down. So, but that, ship companies will go out of business, but that will then, when things get back to normal, hopefully, that will ramp up again and quickly climb back up to those heights, I would say probably in 5 years' time.
What do you have to do? Because we talk a lot about the teams sailing through the Southern Ocean and sailing around the world, and the teams have rightly decided that they need to be very concerned with the impact that they're having when they're racing on the water, and before and after. What do you have to do in that part of the world with the way you operate in order that you have as minimal negative impact as possible?
Oh yeah, no, we have a. I wish I could show you a picture of our. It's now all online now, but when the last hard copy version was probably about, 10 inches high of paperwork from the Tour Operators Association and the Antarctic Treaty, that rules and regulations and guidelines and all sorts of things. Biosecurity is a big thing now. It's massive, and permitting systems for every nationality of ships and planes. You have to get a permit. We work through the Foreign Office in the UK. So, when I first went down, there was nobody to ask to go down to Antarctica. You could pretty much do what you like. Not that we ever really did anything malicious, but we had a ball down there. And nowadays, there's eyes everywhere. If you put a foot wrong, somebody will have photographed you, somehow, and that's reported back. And I could be prosecuted under British law. Part of the Antarctic Act, I think, of 2013 now is legislated. And, for doing anything wrong, like environmental, issue, or not getting a permit in the first place, or anything like this, or disturbing wildlife. And so it's all gotten very serious, very regulated, and it had to because of as I said, the tourism growth numbers. So it's very different. So I spend a lot of my time on paperwork, permitting, keeping up with all the changes which happen yearly and throughout the year as things change in the environment. Different initiatives and tour operators now down there. It's all educational based tourism. So you have to have a quotient of that in your whole, your brochures and your itineraries and that type of thing. It's basically educating people. If you bring them down there, you've got to educate them so when they go away, they know a little bit more about it and get a better appreciation for things like climate change and environment.
How much does the does the area itself take care of that? I mean, how much of an impact does it have on people to just go down there and see it and learn those lessons that, we've got to look after it?
No, I think it has a big impact. We've gotten a lot of feedback, a lot of donations to various organizations that are doing science down there via the tourist ship contingent from the companies and from the tourist ship clients.
Just wondering, in terms of you and your experiences for all those years, multiple decades, have there been any wildlife encounters, whales or whatever, that you still you can still feel kind of, make your hairs on the back of your neck stand up? What's been the sort of standout moment?
Oh, yeah, many. I mean, when we go down, people say to us, "Oh, if we go down, will we see whales in the Antarctic?" And well, that's something you can pretty guarantee. You'll see hundreds of humpback whales, and sometimes they come up right next to the boat and bubble feed, bubble net, right there. You're looking right down on top of them, and it's amazing, and it happens all the time. And so we have a lot of memories of that. And then, of course, on South Georgia, things like skiing down around and through the penguin colony after a long ski traverse, and you're skiing down through these hundreds of thousands of king penguins, not right through the colony. You have to go around the colony. Obviously, that's the way to do it, so you don't disturb them. But you're in amongst these, almost 500,000 penguins, and, your boat's waiting out for you on the anchorage there, and you've come down and you ski right to the shore, and then the dinghy comes in. I mean, stuff that's, no place else you can do this, and nobody else around. We go down in South Georgia in September. We're the only vessel on the island. It's pre-cruise ship season.
It feels like the big thing that you've been able to do, that a lot of the sailors in the races past have not been able to do, is slow down. And you've been able to, sort of drop anchor and explore the land down there and everything. For anybody that might be watching this and is going to be doing the next edition of the race or future editions of the race, and they are going to come hurtling through this part of the world. And I know that it always leaves an impression on people, but is there a way that you could say to people, make sure you see this, make sure you look at that, make sure you take this moment in, even though you're going to go through it at breakneck speed? You won't want to miss it.
Yeah, no, I think they do. I think they all appreciate being down there, and I've actually had a couple of my old Whitbread mates go with me on trips, as extra crew when needed. Dying to go down, and a lot of the sailors I talk to, they always ask me about it, and they always express a wish. I had Thomas Colville in Cape Town after his first failed attempt, on that Atlantic trimaran run, and he came into Cape Town, and we had a long chat, and he's dying to go down with us at some point, in his career. He's very busy. But yeah, they would all like to do what I'm doing. I would say it's the same spirit of going around the world as exploring these places, and I think a lot of these guys will do that for sure.
I had a couple of questions sent to me actually before we were doing this interview, and you reminded me because you just mentioned catamarans. So I just want to fire out a couple of these questions because I thought they were really good. One person was asking, and this is in a reference to your pelagic boats, Australis and your original boat. Would you ever consider building a large expedition catamaran? And I thought it was an interesting question because, of course, you've done on Innovation Explorer, you raced around the world on a multi-hull boat. In terms of sort of exploring down there and being in the Southern Ocean, how does it compare being on a monohull, albeit a maxi, to then being down through those kind of high latitudes on a multi-hull? Would it work the same way?
Well, not for what we do, not for poking around inshore, getting involved in ice conditions. There's been a few plastic catamarans who've been down to the Antarctic, and they've all had major issues. And so not recommended. I mean, certainly for, tropics, that the catamaran is the only way to go. If you have an expedition ship in the tropics doing research or tourism or whatever, that's a no-brainer. But for down there, a catamaran, I think, is a liability in terms of, you're sailing in very tight, narrow channels. You've got katabatic winds. You've got brash ice all over the place. I think, you'd have more hassle trying to get from A to B and out of B to get back to A. And, just, yeah. Yeah, we get asked the question all the time. I mean, I'm thinking about building an aluminum 70-foot catamaran. What do you think? And I said, think again. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Not a good idea.
Another question then, something that you will have seen, not necessarily from your racing side, but certainly when you were doing the Whitbread back in the day, it was predominantly male sailors. I mean, you mentioned maiden, but realistically, that was a rarity. It was male sailors. With a lot of the sailing that you're doing at the moment, where you're taking scientific expeditions or mountaineers or stuff like that, do you find that there's any difference now in terms of seeing more females on board your boats? And do you sort of think, do you know what, we could have had a 50-50 mixed crew back when we were doing the races in the 70s and 80s? It would have been perfectly viable.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't want to get into that debate because I got in trouble on one of the article I wrote some long time ago for Yachting World about that whole subject. Sailing on the big IOR maxis back in the day, you would have had to have been a pretty special, robust, strong, big female to probably getting myself in trouble big time already to have coped with the loads and carrying the sails around. It was backbreaking. The boats today, sails are lighter, boats are easily driven faster. You're sailing on the leading edges of fronts. I mean, back in the day, we were passed over by the weather, so we had more squalling, more sail changes, no doubt. It was, in that respect, much more difficult sailing, even though we were going a lot slower. Because we were going slower, we had more sail changes. Nowadays it's different. And I mean, certainly, where we sail in the Antarctica, I had a female skipper on my little boat in 1995. I've had a female skipper. She's actually doing the Golden Globe race, the only female entry, actually, Kirsten Neuschaffer. She's been skippering Pelagic for the last 2-3 years, and she's been on my big boat as well as a mate. And she's up in Canada now, getting her little Cape George 36 fitted out. Obviously we have, you always, normally on my boat, we have a skipper and a partner, male and female partner running the boat, plus another nipper, young Rambo type, can be a girl or a boy on board, crew of 3. Yeah, so we are absolutely gender friendly, I would say.
And lastly, one other question that we got sent it was a query about your name. And I'm not sure whether the person who asked the question has a loaded interest, but basically asking about Novak being a typical Czech name. I'm wondering whether you had any roots there, considering that in the sort of, yachting is quite popular on terms of the seashore down there and all the rest of it. I'm wondering whether you had any kind of history down there.
No, I mean, my grandparents came over after the turn of the century, way back, Czech on the one side and German on the other. And I remember them speaking with broken accents as a young kid in Chicago, but my parents were totally American and they basically forgot about the old country, and I never thought about it too much. So yeah. But Novak is like Smith. It's the meaning is new, is actually Novak sort of means new. And it's, if you look in a phone book, in some place in Chicago, there will be thousands of Novaks because a lot of Czechs went to Chicago area for sure, Midwest.
Lastly, then, I know that you are, I know that you're in quarantine, you're stuck in a hotel, but I don't want to use up all of your time. So lastly, as a point, yeah, it's fascinating to hear you. It's fascinating to hear you talk about what it's like being on the water and experiencing everything in the Southern Ocean. Like I said at the beginning, a part of the world that most people don't want to go or certainly want to leave. When you are now in your hotel room itching to get back out there, what's the sound and the sights and the smells maybe? What is that thing that you can feel pulling you back to that ocean more than anything else?
I think it's, for me, it's fresh air. And, I don't go well in warm weather. So I love fresh, cold air on my face and breathing, lungfuls of fresh, cold air. And it invigorates me. It energizes me. I go sort of dead in hot weather. I just want to lay out like a bloody salamander and I can't do anything. I'm totally useless. So yeah, it's a climatic thing for me. And once again, for me is, there's nothing feeling better than motoring out to the heads in charge of your own boat, heading off for a project. I mean, that's the happiest feeling in the world for me. I think for any skipper, when you actually cast off and you've started a project that you've been planning for a long time and it's all coming to fruition, past all the hurdles, and off you go. And it's a liberty and a freedom and in the grandest sense, I think.
Oh, Skip, thank you very much for talking us through what makes you so passionate about it.
Thanks very much. Cheers.
Some incredible stories from Skip Novak, and my thanks for him for taking the time, not only from the races past, but also about what it's like to really fall in love with adventuring at sea. If you've enjoyed this interview, you can leave us a like, you can subscribe for many more. We've got some big names coming up in the next few weeks, so we'll see you then.